Big God Energy misunderstands Genesis. Yeah, what's going on, party people? The place to be. I go by the name of the BK Apologist, transmitting all the way live. New York is the city, Brooklyn is the borough. What's good? What's popping to each and everyone out here in these YouTube streets? Shout out to Wawo in the building. Definitely do what she says here. Please share the link and smash that like button. It's very importante. Okay, it's very important. Very important that that goes down. Tyler Lott on the check-in. What's going on, sir? Good to see y'all. And of course, like what Warrior Woman said, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend that it's him again. Trying to get to 6,000 before year's end, and that can only happen if the people in the chat take a little time out of their busy schedules to, post a link on their respective, quadrants of Al Gore's internet. And if you like how it goes down with BK, you can show your appreciation via the PayPal link that is pinned on top of the chat. You could toss a little digital coinage my way. Definitely would appreciate that. And if you want to be a monthly supporter of BK, you can join the Patreon where you get an assortment of gifts or assortment of, teaching, helping situations that will enhance your personal Bible study. All right. Adrian Jones on the check-in. What's going on, good sir? So, as of late, if you are a recent subscriber of the channel, you can see that a lot of my focus has been Hebrew Israelism in its many derivatives and denominations. But if you are a longtime subscriber of BK, you know that a lot of my focus has been towards the what's known as the conscious community. And I haven't done as much because there really hasn't been a lot over there to really deal with. To be quite honest, that I haven't already dealt with already. And if I was to be more transparent, I feel like Hebrew Israelism is more of a factor when it comes to people being beguiled out of the gospel. But every once in a while, I do peek and see what's going on that side of the streets of YouTubery. I just made that up, YouTubery. Um, in the conscious community, and there's this new guy. Well, new to me. He could be around for a while. Named I think God Energy, and he's been on Sonetta a few times. And he made a comment about Genesis that I found interesting, and I want to take his comment and really use it as a teachable moment. So because we all know that a lot of these communities, they've created a cottage industry and banging against Christianity, and they build entire platforms on trying to go at the gospel, to try to destroy it, to diminish it, to marginalize it, right? And those of us who are on the internet, who are apologists, we're here to defend against such attacks. So this is a presentation that he did, I think, earlier this week, and this is what he says. All right, just give me a minute here.
All right. So this is the syncretism. This is that Egyptian, Canaanite, Greek syncretism that you see show up in the Bible as well. That's one of the reasons why Sancho Nietan's Phoenician history could be considered a proto-Genesis. So that syncretism of Egypt, Canaanite, and Greek does not even first show up in the Bible. There is an older theogony in text who did that first, that the biblical Genesis is a product of or based off of. And when you look, the Bible even reads as a polytheistic theology, right?
Yes.
In the Hebrew, it has Bereshit, Bara Elohim, Et Hashemayim, Ve'et Ha'eretz, right? And that Shemaim and Eretz are deities. So this
Mm.
reads just like a theogony of Elohim having Shemaim, having Eretz. That's exactly how these other theogonies begin. In the beginning, there was Kronos who begot Zeus, who begot Uranus. That's exactly how these read.
So this is what that's what he said about the Genesis account, that it is full of polytheism and that it has a theogony. A theogony is basically a origin story of a deity, right? The birth of a deity. And we see this in various creation accounts in the ancient Near East. The problem, there is no theogony in the Genesis creation account. There is no birthing or creating of any deity. The Genesis account starts with Yahweh. He was already there. He doesn't be begotten, or he's not being configured or being composited. None of these things occur in the Genesis account. So for him to say that there's a theogony in Genesis, it's not there. And this idea of polytheism isn't there as well. And but earlier he does say that Genesis has a polemic component to it. So he got that part right, but then he goes into this and that the Genesis account is basically very similar or draws from these other ancient Near East creation accounts. So I would like to posit to the chat that this is definitely not true. All right. So with that being said, you already know what's coming. I'm going to share the screen. So let's break this down. All right, we're going to talk about the Genesis polemic, rewriting the fabric of ancient cosmic reality. Because what Genesis really does, it does a shattering of ancient myths, it strips nature of divinity, and it establishes a functioning order. Right? That's the main thrust of Genesis. It's about the functionality and how God, without any adversity, creates the world to function a certain way. Okay? So, this is the baseline reality of most ancient Near East creation stories. It's Theomachy and Chaos Kamuth. So most of these have these in common. One, there's a class revolt. Proletariat gods grumbling over labor and staging insurrections. For example, Atrahasis, right? Or you have a generational coup. Younger gods assassinating older elites to seize control of the pantheon. Or you might see a political struggle within these creation accounts. Competing claimants battling for the throne of divine supremacy, for example, Baal and Yah. Then you have the macrocosmic chaos kamuth. Chaos kamuth is a Russian word, and it means establishing order through violent, bloody combat with sea monsters like Marduk or Tiamat versus Tiamat. Right? These are the basic motifs of most ancient Near East creation stories. Right? In the ancient cognitive landscape, cosmic order is exclusively the byproduct of divine bloodshed and war. Okay, this is what you find in most creation accounts outside of Genesis. But with Genesis, you have this ultimate paradigm shift. Whereas, in the ancient Near East, there's this polytheism, right? There's blurred, permeable lines between God, nature, and humanity. But the Genesis account is a complete break from that. Genesis is a intentional anti-mythical polemic. It does not simply adapt motifs, it deliberately undermines them, right? It's a radical secularization and uncrossable boundary between creator and created object. And this is what Gerhard Hazel has to say about this. He says that it appears that the Genesis cosmology represents not only a complete break from the ancient Near Eastern mythological cosmologies, but represents a parting of the spiritual ways. It is a critique. Genesis is a critique of the competing creation stories in that same region. And it's not borrowing from these, it's undermining, it's undercutting, it's using the language that's familiar to these other peoples to show how Yahweh is sovereign, right? So he's speaking the Genesis account is speaking in a manner in which its original intended audience would understand. So you got two lenses of ontology. You got the material versus the functional. You got modern material, which the focus is physical properties, manufacturing of atoms, origins of matter. The problem with that is that it's anachronistic to the ancient cognitive world. This is not what they were concerned about in the ancient Near East, right? It was more about the functionality of things, right? They wasn't so focused on what things were made of as opposed to what were these things supposed to do. Like, how does this work? Like what's the function, right? What's the roles, the purpose, the systemic order and naming, right? To create in the Hebrew, bara, is to assign a function within an ordered system, not to manufacture matter. In a functional ontology, a pre-creation state in the Hebrew tohu wabohu is not devoid of matter, it's devoid of function and purpose. So that's the main thrust of the Genesis account. It's not about how, it's not a scientific treatise and how things were made. It's more about, well, these things were made with this purpose in mind. Okay, this is what Genesis conveys because that's what was important to that original audience. Functionality, not materiality. So here you have a nice compare and contrast between the Enuma Elish and Genesis 1. So when you think about the pre-creation state, the Enuma Elish has personified rival gods, Apsu and Tiamat, whereas in Genesis, passive, purely material, inanimate ocean, Tehom, which we'll talk about pretty soon. The method of creation for the Enuma Elish and many other creation accounts, violent combat, bloodshed, and magical spells. Whereas in the Genesis account, there is an unchallenged divine word, fiat, right? God's not fighting anybody in the account. He says something and it happens. That's it, right? When you look at the cosmic architecture, right, in the Emuna Elish and with other creation stories, built from the mutilated corpse of a dead goddess. Whereas in Genesis, it's an ordered without effort by separation on horizontal and vertical planes. Right? Nobody's getting cut up. There's no fight. There's no struggle. There is zero adversity in the Genesis account. And then humanity's role, right? In the Amun Lish and with many other ancient Near East accounts, slaves created from the blood of a rebel god to relieve deities of labor, right? That was the intent of creating human beings in a lot of these creation accounts. You was made just to be a slave to these deities to make sure they get their food and stuff like that. Whereas in the Genesis account, humans are royal delegates created in the Imago Dei to rule a functional system. Big difference in all these categories, right? So to say that the Genesis account is compared or borrows or plagiarized from these other accounts is completely wrong if you actually read the text the way they would have understood it from back then. In fact, it's a critique against these other competing creation stories. Now we are talking about I mentioned Tehum, right? The word Tehum, and there is a mythical echo to this term. Many scholars assume Tehum was a borrowed derivative of Tiamat, the Babylon chaos monster. But the linguistic reality is that phonologically, it's phonologically impossible to derive directly. Both simply share a common Semitic root meaning ocean. But here where it gets interesting in how the Genesis account uses this word. There is a polemic diffusion here. Genesis strips the water of will and personality. There is no resistance, no struggle. It is merely a calm, unorganized element awaiting assignment. The waters are not evil, they are simply waiting for order. Yahweh is not having a 10-round fight with some watery chaos monster. There's no fight. The Spirit of God hovers over the waters, and it does exactly what Yahweh wants the waters to do. The waters itself doesn't have a personality. It has no personhood. It doesn't think on its own. It's an inanimate material that's there to be used by Yahweh at will. Okay, that's what's happening here. Shout out to Ben Eaton and Water Blue Ezekiel. Thank you for coming through. And we got Lauren. Hey, Lauren, what's going on? All right, so and then we have these sea monsters, these creatures from beneath the waters, right? Taming the Tanim. So the threat in Ugaritic and Canaanite myth, the Tanim, dragon sea monsters, are pre-existent chaotic rivals to the gods. This is how they are portrayed in most ancient Near East creation stories. But in Genesis 1:21 uses the verb bara to create specifically for the Tanim, explicitly confirming their origin. So in the Genesis account, these creatures that dwell in the water aren't eternal beings. They have a start date. They are made of stuff. They're contingent beings. They are not gods in the Genesis account. Like I said, there's no theogony. There's no birth story, origin story of other gods. These are just creatures. They are not eternal. They are not rivals. They are simply large aquatic animals made by the sovereign. That's all they are in the Genesis account. In other accounts, they are rival gods jockeying for position to see who could be king of the hill. No such battle taking place in the Genesis account. By stating the sea monsters were created without effort, Genesis contradicts the pagan battle myth. They are part of God's peaceable kingdom, so harmless that Psalm 104 refers to Leviathan as God's plaything. This is the antithesis of all these other creation stories, right? So now, and this is something that he talked about, right? The heavens, right? The context in the ancient Near East cultures universally worship the sun, moon as sovereign deities and omens of fate. But in Genesis, the author intentionally refuses to use the Semitic words for sun and moon, which doubled as the name of pagan gods. See, Mr. Big Guy Energy was saying that there's a theogony because they're using the same words for these deities that were known back then. Actually, the writer goes out of his way to not use those terms so that people don't make that idea. Like we're not gonna give any of these other gods any kind of airtime. So you have the reassignment to strip them of identity They are functionally reduced to merely the big light and the little light. That's the words, which is not usually used for sun and moon. But the writer knew that the average Semitic terms for these things were also the names of these deities. So Genesis, being the polemic that it is, like, well, we're not going to use those terms because I don't want nobody getting it twisted. Like, these things were created by Yahweh to function. And what's their function? Right? They're installed on day 4, not as deities, but as mechanical appliances. Cosmic clocks designed solely to track signs, seasons, days, and years. That's it. They have a function and they serve man. By looking at the sun and the moon, we know what season, what month, when to, to grow certain crops. They serve us. We don't serve them, right? Major shot across the bow when it comes to those deities. Like, there is no deities here but Yahweh, right? These sea creatures, they're not rightful gods. They're just aquatic creatures that God created. The sun, the moon, they're not gods either. They are calendars for man. Man was not created to be a slave. We was created to be a royal priesthood, to be the Imago Dei, to represent the Most High on this planet. Very, very different than any other ancient Near East creation story. So you got day 1, right? Separation of light and darkness establishes time. Day 2, you got the horizontal separation of waters above and below. That establishes weather. And you got split 3, day 3, the vertical separation of dry land and sea, which establishes agriculture. Creation happens via the spoken word. This is directly attacks the ideal of magical utterance. God creates through absolute authority, not by manipulating external magical forces. Because you'll see in some of the comedic origin stories, I think it's Ptah, it'll say that, well, Ptah creates the world with his words. But those words are incantations and sorcery. God don't need to do any of that. He doesn't have to persuade the elements to do his bidding. He just says, do this, and it happens. Big difference. Big difference. And then, of course, you have the shattering of the time loop, cyclic versus linear reality. And again, in most ancient Near East creation stories, you have time as an endless loop. The primordial combat must be ritually repeated to ensure agricultural fertility and societal survival. The result is endless anxiety and repetition. If we don't do these set type of prayers and incantations and sacrifices, we might not get good crops this year, right? Because we got to make sure that we continue reviewing these same moments time and time again. Whereas for Genesis, we have a chronological sequence. Creation is once for all. It's a completed event that ends in permanent rest. The result is the inauguration of actual linear history. Again, totally different than these other accounts. So Mr. Big Guy Energy is making a huge mistake trying to plug in the Genesis account as being similar in any way, shape, or form. The only thing that this has in common with these other stories is that there's a God in it and that God makes the world. After that, it couldn't be any more different. It just couldn't. All right. So Lauren, hey Lauren, you got a question here? So yeah, let me answer that real quick. So she's asking why they think the Bible in Genesis says the Earth is flat. I know it's not flat, but Hebrew Israelites think Moses wrote it's flat with a dome, even though Moses was educated in Egypt. Well, in the ancient Near East, funny enough, in their cosmology, they did believe that there was this dome and that there was like pillars supporting the world, right? Most people in the ancient Near East believe that. Interesting enough, Yahweh doesn't correct the Israelites when it comes to that at all. Why? Well, because that's not the concern, right? Genesis, even though there's a lot of science, it is not a scientific book, right? That's not the thrust of the book. The thrust of the book is I am God and no one else, and I am the reason why things work. That's the point. And God is actually using their understanding of how the world works so that they can understand him. Right? Nowhere in the Bible does God reveal himself and says, "Thus saith the Lord, oh, by the way, here's quantum physics." Right? Humanity will learn and understand and update its understanding of the world around it. And that's what Hebrew Israelites, not all, but some seem to miss. Right? So God doesn't correct their science at all. This is what they understand at this time, and God works with humanity where they're at. Right? He uses what they understand to explain who he is and how, and so that he can reveal himself, and that us as humans could understand because he's talking our language. So that's what's happening. So did the ancients think the world was flat? Well, yeah, there was a dome and everything. This is what they believed. We don't believe that no more because our science has been updated. We have more data, more knowledge. God didn't feel the need to update. His concern was, I need you to understand who I am. So I'm going to use the things that you understand now so that you can understand who I am in relation to humanity. So I hope that helps, Laura. So here you have this constructing of the cosmic temple, because that's what the world actually is. And you got the functions, or you got functionaries, right? Day one is time. Day two, weather. Day three is food. Day four is the luminaries, the lesser light, the greater light, right? The sun and the moon. Day five, birds and fish, and day six, beasts and humans. In the ancient world, deities rest only in temples once stability is achieved. Genesis 1, and this is how the original audience would have saw Genesis 1, is a 7-day temple dedication ceremony. God takes his throne in the center of the cosmic system to maintain its perfect order. Right? These what other gods do after they have this bloody fight. They rest to take control of the world. God doesn't have to fight anybody. There's no there's no blood being shed at all. He does what he wants, how he wants, when he wants. And his temple is the whole universe. It's not just some little, house on a mountain. His temple is everything, which again is another shot against these other rival so-called gods. Okay, and this has great ramifications in how we live based on our creation account. Right, the ethics of sovereignty, rejecting imperial violence, the imperial lie, the chaos come off justify violent imperial expansion and strict social hierarchies, framing the masses as slaves to elite mediators. So if you believe that the world was created by this WWE cage match between these gods, and that once one god kills the other god, humans have are now enslaved to the king god now. Well, that's going to be reflected on the people because they're going to think, well, that's how we have to move. We need to have hierarchy. I want to be God in my own right. So, and if you notice in the ancient East, most kings fancied themselves as gods. and they enslaved the public. But they did that as a reflection of their creation account. Like, well, that's how they did it, so that's the pattern we need to follow. Whereas in the Genesis, it subverts all of that by entirely removing primordial violence from creation. Genesis removes the theological justification for earthly violence and oppression. The Genesis account is about the liberation of the functionality of the world we live in. That's what Genesis account is, right? It talks about the Imago Dei. Agency is not restricted to kings. All of humanity is gifted with divine agency to make history and steward the cosmic temple, i.e., the world. We partner with Yahweh. We're not under Yahweh's thumb. We get to partner with him. We reflect who he is in this realm as royal priests without violence, without adversity, working together, man and woman, cultivating this cosmic temple. That's the original job of humans until we rebelled. And then when we rebelled, now we fight the land for food, right? That's one of the curses. And now men and women are adverse to one another when they weren't before the fall. And the entire meta narrative of scripture from Genesis to Revelation is God in pursuit of humanity to bring him back to their Edenic function, to bring them back to how it was in Eden, in Genesis. So, yeah, God energy has this totally messed up. It is nothing like these other creation accounts at all. It is a slap in the face to the other creation accounts in the A&E. It's not a, there was no fighting, no bloodshed, no enslavements. It was us partnering with God, walking with God as his priests on this planet. That's what it was. And that's what God wants it to be now for us. So, in conclusion, no rivals to fight, no magic to harness, no pre existing matter to conquer. It is a functional cosmos ordered effortlessly by an unopposed king. Humanity liberated from divine slavery to act as royal delegates. That's the Genesis account, guys. That's that's the point of the Genesis account. God is sovereign. There is no one that can even come close to getting at him. There is nobody. There's no competition for Yahweh. That's one of the main points of Genesis account. Two, God is the reason why everything works. And when things don't work, it's because we are in rebellion towards him. And humans, because everything that he created has a function. Our function was to be royal priests. Every human being, not just the king, the governor, the senator, the president, not just these guys, but every regular smuggler person is a royal priest. Right? Genesis 1 is not a primitive scientific textbook. It is a masterful, reality warping theological triumph that dismantled the ancient world's deepest fears and birthed a universe of purposeful order. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what Genesis is about. There is no polytheism. There is no bloodshed. There is no fight. There is no 10 round, no holds barred cage match, pay per view. None of that happens here. God does what he wants because he's God. God creates everything to function, to work on behalf of his ultimate creation, me and you. And our function is to reflect him. That is the Genesis account. And here's some of the scholars that I use to make this presentation. You know, you got Gerald Hassel, John Walton, one of my favorites. We got Richard J. Middleton. I actually have a video interviewing Mr. Middleton. You need to check that out on my channel. We got Brevard S. Childs, Mark S. Smith, Richard Hess, James Hoffmeyer, who was the teacher of Dr. David Folk, who you've seen plenty of times on the channel, and Andre Van Onsterhoom. Right. So if you want to dig deeper into the understanding of this amazing Genesis creation account, you could definitely tap into these guys, read their literature, and get better acquainted with this. All right, so that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing here. So yeah, so big Mr. God Energy totally misses the boat with Genesis, and I'm not saying he did that on purpose. I don't know the gentleman. I don't know his intent. I assume he's sincere until proven otherwise, but he is just very wrong, you know. And it's like they want to strip the uniqueness of the Bible. They want to, you know, by saying, oh, it's just like everything else. They're trying to make it small. They're trying to marginalize the God, the Bible. And as apologists, we're not gonna let that happen. We're gonna dig into the text and make sure we understand the various contexts. And when you do that, clearly these gentlemen are wrong and how they understand Genesis. And when you understand Genesis, you actually understand how the world was supposed to be. And it's convicting when you really understand, you know, the sovereignty of God, the discipline and order that He put the world in, how special He thought of us, as opposed to just being mere servants at His beck and call. We get to be priests. It's a huge rebuke towards all the other creation stories in the ancient Near East. So for him to say it's just like the others, you haven't done your due diligence, sir. Respectfully, Mr. God Energy. Respectfully. You know, you seem to be somebody who likes to read and you know you sharing different sources, and I respect that, you know, but you have to really again respectfully understand the sources that you're reading and make a coherent argument respectfully. I'm not saying you're dumb at all. You know, it's just sometimes, you know, our biases get the best of us. That's all I'm saying. And yes, everyone has a bias. The issue isn't having a bias. The issue is is your bias grounded in reality? Because as I've said before, the reason why anyone should be a Christian is because it's true. Because it's true, right? This really happened. Jesus is a historical person. He really is who he claimed to be. Right? These things are not myth. These things, these supernatural, amazing things happen in actual human history. And in our history, God has been trying to get us back to Eden. And you know, he's tried, you know, floods and wars and prophet after prophet and until he came down himself, incarnated, led by example, and allowed himself to be killed by the very humans he created. Why? So that he could take away our iniquity, give us his spirit, and restore us back to Eden. Because when Revelation is over and said, new heaven, new earth, and God is walking amongst us, just like how he was in Genesis. So your creation story has a lot to your beginning has a lot to do with how it's going to end. And Genesis provides an amazing beginning. It's such an amazing beginning that God literally died for us to go back there. So Genesis is definitely as much of the gospel as what we see in the New Testament. That's the point. That's the point. And that's what God energy is missing, respectfully. So with that being said, boys and girls, I hope you like that. I hope you appreciate that. I hope you feel edified, educated, maybe somewhat entertained. Please share this. Not just with your friends, your church people. You know, and hey, if you want me to do a Zoom teaching at your local church, I am available. If you want me to do some of these things that you see me do on YouTube for your church, I'm here. Just holler at me in the comments. Let's work something out. I would love to serve your ministry in any capacity that I can. All right. So, with that being said, this is BK signing off. Peace.